They hate Soviets for this. Probably many people have heard about the Soviet government, something that was there in the 20th century. Red collar, workers and peasants, etc. But what was the Soviets? How does the Soviet government differ from the State Duma of Russia or the Parliament of Great Britain? What is Parliament anyway? Let's try to figure out. In Russia, the Federal Assembly is the USA, the Congress. In Germany, the Bundestag. In the UK, the Parliament. The words are different, but the meaning is the same. All this is the highest legislative body of the country. In the international environment, it is usually called the Parliament. But in each country, as you can see, the name may be different. How does it work? You create a party, then run an advertising campaign on the eve of the parliamentary elections, and more votes you get, more seats you will have in parliament. When you become a deputy, you are supposedly conducting a policy on behalf of your party in the interest of your constituents. I.e., you make laws and monitor the work of the government so that everyone is satisfied and happy, and then they will vote for you again in the next election. On paper, it is real democracy, but in reality, not at all. At first glance, it seems that thanks to the parliament, power is formed from the bottom up. The people go to the polls and thus raise their representatives to the top. But this is not quite true. The people really lifting up those whom they choose. But often people do not choose who they will choose. In other words, which parties and candidates will be in the elections often does not depend on the voter. On the paper, we are all equal, and everyone can create their own party, participate in elections, etc. Practically, it costs money to create your own party, to conduct an advertising campaign too. In reality, and not on paper, the people do not have this money. In fact, the people excluded from the possibility of nominating candidates, and simply forced to choose only from what is available. However, if all the majority can do is choose from what they were represented with, but not nominate their own candidates, then what kind of democracy is this? We may want to see a candidate that we personally trust, but we will be told, well, pay then. Formally it is correct, but in fact it's humiliation. There is nothing to pay with. It turns out that the people do not have the opportunity to nominate their candidates, and only those who have money have it. In turn, it turns out that the rich impose a choice on the poor. It's not very democratic, isn't it? But that's how we live now. This is our reality. So, at the heart of the parliament is legal equality and democracy, and in practice, inequality in opportunities and the power of the rich minority. Who is this rich minority and what does it do? They are almost always entrepreneurs. Only they have the resources for the politics. Still, it would be unfair and even deceitful if we say that the parliament forbids the people to represent their interests. This is absolutely not the case. Nothing prevents the people from forming their own party, but it is much more difficult to do this than for entrepreneurs. Let's say the existence of the party costs 1 billion rubles a year. Let's imagine that a simple working man is ready to allocate 10,000 rubles a year for a party. So to finance your own party you will need 100,000 workers. That's a lot. And how many entrepreneurs will it take to finance such a party? Quite possibly only one. There are such rich people. Which side have the advantage in such a situation? Who is easier to organize? The answer is obvious. And if 1,000 entrepreneurs join the party, what can the working people oppose to such an alliance? Very little, and very likely will lose elections. One way or another, whether we want it or not, but in reality and not on paper, the parliament is the highest state body which for 90% consists of rich entrepreneurs or their henchmen. Of course, there are always exceptions, but they only confirm the rule. An equal financial situation creates unequal political opportunities. It just seems that in Russia or USA, it's not the same as in any other Western countries. In fact, it is so everywhere where the parliament exists. In other words, parliament is kind of service sector, a political one. Therefore, it is not surprising that a simple working person cannot afford a politician. This service is too expensive. Well, what is the Soviet way? Soviet way means that the politics is no longer a service sphere, not for sale. The nomination of candidates take place on a completely different principles. Take the so-called Stalinist Constitution of 1936. Article 141. Candidates for elections are nominated by electoral districts. The right to nominate candidates is granted to public organizations and workers' organizations, Communist Party organizations, working unions, cooperatives, youth organizations, and cultural societies. Even a person who is far from politics may notice the difference in comparison with the parliament. But in reality, this is a revolution. The Soviet Union guaranteed that every social stratum could be represented in power: workers, collective farmers, intellectuals, military youth, and so on. Of course, there could be no question of any individual nomination. And why? If you nominate not from the collective, but from yourself, the question arises: why? Whose interests are you going to defend in there? Your own? Then politics is not for you. The Soviet state is a public state, a people's state. This is no place for personal interest. Let's see how it worked in practice. Let's look in research of Alexander Fokin, an associate professor at Chelyabinsk State University, elections in the USSR in 1960s and 70s, a simulation or an element of democracy, made in 2014. In the elections of local councils of the СССР in 1967, more than 1 million candidates were chosen. In 1969, about the same number. Among the candidates there was such a distribution: women, half of the candidates, non-partisans, workers, and collective farmers, as well as those who were candidates for the first time, more than a half in each category. It doesn't look very much like totalitarian control or nomenclature. It doesn't look very much like a total control of nomenclature, does it? However, many may have heard that the elections in Soviet Union were uncontested. It's true, the candidate for deputy from his district had no competitors. You either choose it or you don't. Therefore, they say that the Soviets are a dictatorship and the parliament is a democracy. But in fact, the opposite is true. It can be said that the vote was only a final part of a complex electoral process within the framework of Soviet democracy. The procedure for selecting the most worthy candidates was based on the requirements that were put forward to potential candidates. In turn, the competition was conducted not for votes, but for a certain symbolic capital. The person who most corresponded to the ideal type of deputy within the field of Soviet politics received approval from both the power institutions and the population. Chelyabinsk Regional Committee noted that some city and district committee of the primary party organization didn't pay enough attention to the selection of individual candidates in advance, without knowing the attitude of the staff to the recommended comrades. A necessary requirement for the candidates was the approval of group, that is, they are, in fact, chose 2 elections, and the polling day just officially confirmed their choice. It turns out that in the parliament you cannot nominate candidates and have to choose from ready-made options. And with the Soviets, you can nominate candidates, but there will be only one candidate in the elections, who was previously chosen by you. That's all. That's why there were no alternatives in the Soviet Union. They were all cut out by the people themselves at the stage of selection candidates. Moreover, in the Soviet Union, you choose not the only candidate for the deputy, but also those who will count those votes. The organization of local elections can be considered within the framework of the Chelyabinsk region of 1966. After the announcement of the election campaign, the Regional Committee Bureau on April 15 adopts a resolution on the organizational and mass political work of a party organizations in connection with the elections to the Supreme Soviet of the USSR, and approves the action plan. Next meeting is held with the heads of the city and district committees. 11 electoral districts are formed for the elections for the Council of the Union, and one for the elections to the Council of the Nationalities. From April 13 to 18, meetings of labor collectives are held to nominate candidates for members of districts and precinct election commissions. They included 7,500 people, of which 49.3% were women and 46.6% were non-partisan. Thanks to such a system of elections in the highest echelon of power, it was possible to see an assembler, a wheelmaker, a combine driver, a steel worker, a deliverer of refractory products, etc. And who can be seen in power today? Wherever you split, all businessmen or their henchmen. For example, let's look not on deputies, but the US defense ministers of the mid-20th century. James Forrestal, president of the Dillon, Breed & Co. Bank. This is all verified information. The description will contain a link to the script where all sources are listed. Louis A. Johnson, member of the board of directors of Vulture Aircraft in 1953. This company joined the General Dynamics Corporation. Today it is a world-famous manufacturer of weapons. Robert A. Lovett, co-owner of the Brown Brothers Harriman & Co. Bank, director of the company North American Aviation, today part of the Boeing. Thomas S. Gates Jr., co-owner of Drexel & Company Bank, which was part of the world-famous Morgan Financial Group, J.P. Morgan & Co. In addition, in the near future, the former Secretary of Defense Thomas Gates will join the predecessor McElroy as one of the directors of General Electric. Charles Erwin Wilson, president of the largest American automobile corporation, General Motors. Neil H. McElroy, member of the board of directors of General Electric and Chrysler. Robert McNamara, just the head of Ford and president of World Bank. For their part, hundreds of generals and admirals are members of the supervisory boards of the arms companies. Only General Dynamics, one of the largest military aircraft manufacturing firms in the United States, pays huge salaries to 27 generals and admirals, and others 160 senior officers who, using their connections, provide the concern with large orders. Generals, admirals, and senior officials almost automatically moved into industry upon retirement. Albert Nordens, so werden Kriege gemacht, so the war begins, or something along those lines. Meanwhile, the heads of the military department of the Soviet Union, Bulgarin, Vasilevsky, Yumashev, Kuznetsov, Zhukov, and Malinovsky, what do they have in common? Never had any connection with business or oligarchs, people from the bottom who rose to the top without backers from banks and corporations. In other words, if in the United States the defense ministry was controlled by the oligarchs and still is, by the way, in the Soviet Union everything was exactly the opposite. The Soviet system made the American dream come true. While in the United States it was almost impossible to rise to the top without Forbes list patrons, in the Soviet Union it was commonplace. Another important difference between the Soviets, which mean councils in Russian, and the parliament was the possibility of recalling deputy up to the highest level, and how this works in parliamentary countries. You choose from the other people candidates who have been lying to you all through the election campaign that they will do so much for you if you vote for them. You trusted and voted. The deputy is elected and immediately forgets about the promises. For 4, 5 or 6 years, depending on the country, MPs either pick their noses or serve their parties, investors and sponsors. And since the working people are not amongst them, deputies do not care about their interests. Next time, thanks to the propaganda, the show will be repeated, and if it is very necessary, they will change one candidate for another with the words, "Now there will definitely be fair courts and transparent elections." In short, as soon as a deputy is elected to parliament, you can do nothing to them. Did they want to accept pension reform? It will be approved regardless of whether you want it or not. And in the system of Soviets, this was excluded. Deputies would immediately lose their seat for anti-people laws. By the way, how many deputies do you think the Russians or Americans will recall today, if they had such opportunity, and who would go first? Write in the comments. In the meantime, we will reopen the Constitution of USSR. This time it will be the Constitution of 1977. Article 107. A deputy is obliged to report on his work and the work of the Council Soviet to the voters, as well as to the collectives and public organizations that nominated him. Deputy in Russian have male gender. As a candidate for deputy. A deputy who does not justify the confidence of the voters may be recalled at any time by a decision of the majority of voters in accordance with the procedure established by law. And this is not just words in the Constitution. This system really worked. The responsibility of the deputy to the voters is deprived of content and meaning if it does not provide guarantees. That is, giving the voters the appropriate sanctions. The highest of them is the right to recall a deputy. Voters are very active in exercising their right of recall. From 1960 to 1982, more than 9,000 deputies were recalled from all councils Soviets, and in 1981, 387 deputies were recalled from local councils, not counting deputies who were deprived of their mandate due to criminal prosecution. It is necessary to improve the quality of the selection of candidates for deputies. Practice showed that one excellent production worker was a deputy, as a deputy may not have the necessary competence and proper efficiency. As a result, not only he and his authority suffer, but also the authority of the council as a whole. In 1987, Moscow News writes, in 1959-1987, 13 deputies were recalled from the Supreme Soviet of the USSR at the request of the voters. For example, in 1961, the first secretary of the Leninabad Regional Committee of the Communist Party of Tajikistan, Halik Ibragimov, was recalled. He systematically overstated information about the implementation of cotton production plants in the region. You can't find such clause in the Constitution of Russia, nor in the Constitution of Germany, nor in the Constitution of the United States and other similar countries. There is no guaranteed right to recall a member of parliament. The whole point is that politics under capitalism is the service sector, a specific but still service. The one who won the elections bought a product, a service lasting several years. Such relations contradict with the recall of deputies. The one who paid for the product or service has the right to dispose of it at its discretion. No one dares to encroach on private property, and especially on private property in the field of politics. Commodity-money relations are above the interest of the people, above anything in general. This is the basis of capitalism. Do you want to recall the MP? Do you want to take away from oligarchs the goods for which they honestly paid? The oligarchs may have dishonestly made their fortune, but they acquired the deputy chair quite honestly, without jokes. Now you want to take away their political property, and then what? Will you block some reform? Will you vote for the nationalization of the factories? Are you communist or something? And indeed, according to some constitutional judges, the recall of deputies is almost extremism. The institution of the recall of deputy contradicts the foundation of the constitutional system of Russian Federation, the essence of a democratic state, and the nature of the legislative body representing the general interest of the people. It will be worth reminding here to the respected Judge Kononov that the democratic state of the Russian Federation, as well as the parliament on which it is based, were created as a result of these events. Do we need to remind you about the shooting of the Supreme Soviet Council of the RSFSR? Remember the democracy on tanks? Remember the predatory privatization of 19th? Well, we remember. But now, of course, the country has really established an exemplary democracy, like in the United States or Germany. The oligarchs or their henchmen are in power, and the power are deprived of the opportunity to nominate their candidates for free. All that is allowed to the people today is to choose which of groups of entrepreneurs will raise their retirement age, cut medicine, education, etc. So what is the Soviet way? The essence of the Soviet way is to exclude money from the politics. Today, even in the most democratic and free republics, power belongs to rich entrepreneurs or their henchmen, i.e. significant minority, and under the Soviets, the state was ruled by a large majority. That is why many business representatives and their closest servants hate the Soviet government. For the Soviet was first power of the people in the history of mankind, whether it's good or bad, whether you like it or not. But this is true power of the people, that is, of a large majority. That is why they hate Soviets. That is why they have so much propaganda against communists and communist movements. That is why you need to pay attention to what you really believe.